A world war sweeps all sorts of people into the fighting, major and minor celebrities among them, so it may come as no surprise that there are more than a few names you might recognize who saw action on D-Day, from athletes to silver screen legends to Hollywood directors and even a famous novelist. Let's take a look at some of the celebrities who stormed the beaches on June 6, 1944.
I can't change the laws of physics. I've got to have 30 minutes.
James Doohan, Star Trek's original and iconic Scotty, joined the Canadian Army in 1938 and saw action fighting for the Allies in World War II. You probably knew this, but yes, Scotty was Canadian. Explains the accent, right? On D-Day, Doohan was part of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. They landed at Juno Beach, one of the most heavily guarded of the 5 landing points. On his way up the beach, Doohan unwittingly ran over anti-tank mines, which thankfully didn't go off. He killed 2 German snipers and safely reached cover in the initial assault. But later that night, a fellow Canadian mistook him for a German in the darkness and shot him 6 times. Doohan lost his right middle finger. During a 1998 interview with the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, Doohan compared his D-Day experience with the famous opening scene from Saving Private Ryan, which depicted the landings at Omaha Beach that same morning. After Doohan recovered from his wounds, he returned to duty and served for the remainder of the war. Even if you don't know baseball, you know Yogi Berra, famous for his quotable lines like, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded." He could have thought the same thing when he fought the Nazis at Normandy. Berra was just 18 and playing for a minor league Yankees team in Virginia when he joined the US Navy. He was almost immediately shipped out to boot camp, where he was trained for the D-Day operation. Berra watched the first assault from the water, where he was a machine gunner on a rocket boat. In his autobiography, It Ain't Over, he wrote, "It was like the 4th of July. It was like the Statue of Liberty fireworks, except not in color."
We were the first ones in before the Army come in. It's amazing what that little boat could do, though.
Eventually, Berra got close enough to the shore to start firing. Amid the chaos, he and his crewmates shot down an American aircraft flying support for the ground troops, thinking it was a German plane. Luckily, the pilot was able to escape and land safely, and Berra escaped D-Day unscathed. A few years later, he was at Yankee Stadium on his way to becoming a baseball legend. David Niven was already a famous Hollywood actor by 1939. He was nearly finished filming the movie Raffles when Germany invaded Poland that September. Niven didn't waste any time. He joined the British Army as soon as the film wrapped. He continued acting during his military service, and coincidentally, as Allies were storming the beaches on June 6, 1944, Niven's film The Way Ahead was being released in London. As fans watched him play a lieutenant on screen, Lieutenant Colonel Niven joined the fighting in Normandy just days after the initial invasion. In his autobiography, David Niven, The Moon's a Balloon, he claimed to have landed under fire at Omaha Beach, but other sources reported that he arrived at Normandy via airplane as part of a BBC contingent. Niven also recalled hiding in a foxhole while fighting at Carentan and being given the Iron Cross by a friend. After D-Day, Niven continued to fight, though he also made frequent trips back to England from the front. Battling nerves and a severe case of seasickness, 21-year-old Private Charles Durning, who'd been drafted the year before, was one of more than 132,000 young men who stormed the Normandy beaches on D-Day.
It was scary. You're not thinking about anything, you're just thinking about, you hope that shell that just went off isn't going to hit this boat.
Durning was one of the first 3 men off his boat when the ramp went down, and he watched in horror as the man in front of him was immediately shot and killed. Struggling in deep water, Durning saw bullets whizzing by him as he made his way to shore, where he recalled seeing men literally ripped in half by German artillery. He sheltered behind tanks as he made his way up the beach under heavy fire. After the war, Durning became known for his roles in the movies Tootsie, The Sting, and True Confessions, as well as his stage performances in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Still, even decades later, Durning never forgot his service, especially those harrowing days at Normandy. When the 4th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army made their D-Day assault in Utah Beach, a relatively unknown 25-year-old writer named J.D. Salinger was among their ranks. Salinger worked on short stories while training for the invasion, including one that would become his most famous work, The Catcher in the Rye. In April 1944, Salinger participated in a now infamous large-scale rehearsal for the invasion known as Operation Tiger, which resulted in the deaths of nearly 750 Allied soldiers after German torpedo boats attacked them.
They didn't have enough guard talent, and some German E-boats saw a target of opportunity.
Salinger was a member of the Army's Counterintelligence Corps, and he was part of either the first or second wave onto the beaches. The Utah beach forces faced light resistance, and Salinger was able to make it ashore with relative ease. But once he got off the beach, the real fighting started, and it was fierce. Salinger and his unit were tasked with liberating the city of Cherbourg, which was critical for the success of the invasion. As a member of the CIC, Salinger was in charge of organizing the interrogation of the hundreds of German POWs. It wasn't until July that he was finally relieved for a few days, after a job well done. By the time he was called up to active duty in September 1941, Oscar-winning director John Ford was already a household name. He was assigned to the Field Photographic Unit, part of the larger Office of Strategic Services, the U.S.'s foremost counterintelligence agency at the time. After serving in the China-Burma-India Theater in 1943, shooting footage for OSS propaganda films, Ford was given a much bigger job in early 1944. The head of the OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, put Ford in charge of Allied photography for the entire D-Day invasion. Ford had already shot the massive Battle of Midway, which had won him another Oscar, and he was there for the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach. During the initial assault, Ford watched from the USS Augusta, but soon got on a PT boat and headed toward the beach. His boat got into a heated machine gun battle with some Germans. Well, at least according to Ford. Many of his biographers think he may have exaggerated that part of the story. Ford spent 5 days filming the invasion, after which news agencies broadcast his footage across the U.S. to keep the public informed about the operation. Brigadier General Theodore Ted Roosevelt Jr. had one of the most outsized reputations of any of the men storming the beaches on D-Day. He was the son of former President Theodore Roosevelt and cousin of current President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But he didn't use his family ties to stay out of the fray. Roosevelt was a soldier through and through, and his conduct on D-Day was nothing short of exemplary. In fact, Roosevelt actually requested to be among the first troops to hit the beaches. He was the highest-ranking military figure to participate in the initial landings, and his bravery earned him widespread accolades from his men. He helped organize and lead the men once they reached the beaches, and his strength and confidence helped inspire troops to press on. It's worth noting he was 56 years old at the time, no spring chicken. In fact, most reports say he was the oldest person to storm the beaches that day. For his effort that day, Roosevelt earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, he wouldn't live to see the end of the war. He died from a heart attack just over a month later on July 12, 1944. Bobby Jones is the only player to ever achieve golf's mythical Grand Slam, winning all 4 major golf tournaments in a single year, 1930. Already long retired from golf by the time World War II broke out, Jones joined the U.S. Army Air Force in 1942, just after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Jones served as an intelligence officer in the 9th Air Force and trained under General Dwight D. Eisenhower for the D-Day invasion. His unit landed at Normandy under heavy enemy fire on June 7th. After 2 days on the beaches, they moved inland, where, like J.D. Salinger, Jones interrogated German POWs. Jones was promoted to lieutenant colonel and discharged in August 1944. The HBO series Band of Brothers, based on Stephen Ambrose's book, brought widespread attention to the stories of many American heroes from D-Day, among them Major Richard Dick Winters. As a commander of Easy Company, Winters was part of the overnight airborne drops behind German lines. He was the jump master of plane number 67, which was hit with anti-aircraft fire while airborne. Winters escaped, but he lost most of his equipment in the descent, landing near Sainte-Mère-Église armed only with a bayonet.
We're not lost, Private. We're in Normandy.
He quickly began rounding up scattered paratroopers to head towards Sainte-Marie-de-Mont, but on the way they met Germans in a small village and had an intense firefight. The unit managed to take out 4 massive artillery cannons, and Winters killed several Germans, all before noon. For his efforts, Winters was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. For decades, British actor Richard Todd wooed audiences with his vivid portrayals of heroes. Modern crowds might know him best from the 1962 film The Longest Day, but Todd wasn't just an immensely popular and talented actor. He was a paratrooper in the British Army's 7th Parachute Battalion during the real Longest Day. Todd was one of the first troops to land behind enemy lines as part of the massive airdrop effort, and he helped the British secure the Pegasus and Ranville bridges. The bridges were liberated by Major John Howard, the same man Todd would later portray in The Longest Day, and Todd and his unit were called in to reinforce Howard and his men. For several hours, Todd's unit fought the Germans in close combats while being bombarded by artillery and mortar fire. In 2004, Todd traveled back to the Normandy battlefield and found the spot where he landed nearly 6 decades before, although this time he didn't have to jump out of a plane to get there. Of all the veterans who fought on D-Day, future President Dwight D. Eisenhower is probably the most famous, but he might also be the one that makes you say, but was he really there at Normandy? As you well know, as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Eisenhower had begun planning for the Normandy invasion in January 1944. The landings were originally scheduled for June 5th, but bad weather forced Eisenhower to postpone the attack. In order to raise troop morale, Eisenhower distributed his now famous Order of the Day just prior to go time.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
As the Allied forces launched the D-Day invasion, Eisenhower was in Portsmouth, England, awaiting news from the front. When news arrived about the tough going at Omaha Beach, he authorized bombing raids to neutralize German forces. The strategy worked. Eisenhower arrived in Normandy on June 7th, giving orders from a warship anchored near Omaha Beach. So it turns out, yes, he was there. He wasn't right there in the bulk of the fighting, but he was also probably a whole lot closer than you imagined.